Hey, ahoy mates! Captain Marrow here, shipwrecked as always, and today I'm going to try to pass some time by telling you all about Charleston and its history of piracy. Now, Charleston is pretty well known for its plantations, the Southern Belles, slavery, its role in the Civil War, and that really seems to be what Charleston wants to be known for. However, it has a lot of pirate history behind it, and it's more or less like a dark secret that the city seems to have swept under its rug. If you go to Charleston today, you won't find hardly anything advertising the fact that it was once a very pirate-centric town, or anything else that alludes to its pirate past. To begin, Charles Towne, as a small new settlement, really needed piracy to actually get up and going. So first off, 1670, this is our first date, and this is when Charlestown Landing was formed on the edge of the Ashley River. Today, you can still go visit the Charlestown Landing. They have a few recreations of various structures around the place, as well as some art pieces, some animals, a recreation of a ketch ship at the time, and as a whole, the place is pretty neat. It's not often too crowded, but you can still go visit what Charleston first was as Charlestown. Next up, 1680. So 10 years have passed, and the Charlestown people have made some good connections with the local natives, and they have convinced them that a better place for them would be down at the very beginning of the Ashley River, where it splits off and becomes the Cooper River. Today, that is actual Charleston. The settlers decided to do the relocating. However, in the aftermath, they were still fearful of Spanish ships spotting the colony. However, it would not be the Spanish that overly bothered them at first. Instead, it would be pirates. In all truth, they were privateers, but of course to the settlers, they would be perceived as pirates. 1685. 5 years have passed since the settlers of Charlestown have relocated. Now, this is when a fortunate accident happens. It just so happens that a brigantine anchors off the coast of Sullivan's Island. This brigantine was captained by John Thurber. Now, John Thurber is a pirate from Madagascar. He was known for being a pirate trader and slaver, and he was on a return trip back to Madagascar from the West Indies when a storm forced him to anchor off of Sullivan's Island and eventually come into Charlestown into port for repairs. This is where he met the British explorer Henry Woodward, and in exchange for his hospitality, Captain Thurber gave him rice. He explained that rice was grown back in Madagascar and in other countries, and that he had seen it as a good source of food and income for other countries. He had no idea how the climate and the soil of Charlestown would take it, but nonetheless he offered it to Henry Woodward. The aftermath is that Charleston could now produce rice, and without rice, Charlestown would not be what it is today, all thanks to a pirate that didn't even mean to come here. Other accounts say that this didn't happen until 1693, but either way, both credit the pirate from Madagascar as the reason for why South Carolina has rice in the first place. Which now brings us to 1686. In 1686, Charlestown has only flourished, and only through dealings with pirates. The ill-gotten gains brought in from the Caribbean, and in general, dealing with pirates, caused Charlestown to grow. In fact, Charlestown had grown a notorious reputation for dealing with and harboring pirates. This directly led to the expulsion of John Boone from Boone Hall Plantation for letting the town come to this. Personally, I don't see what the problem was. Sounds like a great place. 1688. A man named Stede Bonnet is born in Barbados to a rich family, but we will get back to this in a minute. 1691. Now we have the tale of George Rayner, the captain of the Bachelor's Delight. He was pretty well known for assaulting Spanish ships off the southern coast of America, as well as assailing Turkish ships over in the Red Sea. So much so that he and his men became known as the Red Sea Men. And here in the Red Sea is where he amassed a large fortune from attacking a Turkish ship bound for Mecca. Considering this a good enough haul, he decided to head back for South Carolina. After renaming his ship the Loyal Jamaica after performing repairs on it, he eventually ran the ship aground intentionally in Seawee Bay once he had crossed the Atlantic. Once he did, he turned over every cannon, that he had on his ship over to Charlestown. He basically said, hey, you guys need cannons. You're worried about the Spanish, right? They accepted the deal. He was absolved of piracy and got to live in Charlestown as a citizen, as well as the 80 members of his crew. Now, he and the 80 members of his crew have, by this point, already split the wealth between them all. The total wealth being an equivalent of what would be around $83 million today, meaning that every individual had about $1.1 million of currency that they brought into Charlestown. Charlestown went from a struggling port to a place with 80, 20 or so year old millionaires overnight. And honestly, this is where a lot of current day wealthy families in Charleston actually draw the family fortune back to. The initial fortune plundered over in the Red Sea by the crew members of George Rayner. Even Charles Pinckney, signer of the U.S. Constitution, can draw his lineage back to Thomas Pinckney, one of the crew members of George Rayner's expeditions out to the Red Sea, who came back with the ill-acquired gains. Now, George Rayner, once he got back, he actually bought the entirety of Kiowa Island, all for himself. In the aftermath, the year afterwards, he ended up selling half the island to his first mate after he realized that he had no use for such a huge fucking island. George Rayner, however, would not stay on Kiowa Island or in South Carolina for that matter. He would eventually go up to New York and settle down for good. However, he re-left again with Thomas Tew and Henry Every out pirating again. When he came back with more ill-acquired gains, and when confronted about it, he basically handed over more ill-gotten gains and said, I totally have not been out pirating again. And once again, he was forgiven. Eventually, he settles down in Connecticut, where he dies peacefully, a rich man. So good for him. Next up, we have 1693. Now, at 1693, people were fed up with the dirt roads of Charleston. The wagons would constantly get stuck in the muck. The horses would have a hard time with it, because Charleston is especially prone to flooding, especially when it rains. Any of you that live in Charleston, you know this. Now, Charlestown didn't actually have the supplies to pave their roads with cobblestone like back home in England. So what they did was they unloaded the ballast stones from the ships headed over from England, and they used the ballast stones to pave their roads. Now, the ballast stones within a ship, it keeps it from tipping over more than it should. It pretty much weighs down the bottom of the ship. However, these stones were not meant to create cobblestone with. They were round and spherical, more so than oval and flat like you would want to cobblestone a road with. However, it was still better than the mucky roads that they had grown so sick of, even if it was admittedly a bumpy ride. These roads have, by this point in time, mostly been paved over in recent days, but there are a few roads that still exist. For example, Chalmers Street downtown. That's the reason the road is so bumpy. The road is literally made out of ballast stones from the bottom of English ships. It probably sucked to ride on back then in a cart, and it still sucks to drive on today. Next up, we have 1694, ? Sometime in the early to mid 1690s, the Pink House was built. Along the newly ballasted streets, John Breton built this charming one-story, single-room wide structure. The color of the Pink House comes from the Bermuda stone, specifically coral limestone, which gave it a pinkish hue. And at first, the building begins as a groggery, which is kind of a combination of a coffee house and a tavern. And it was frequented by ex-crew members of George Rayner, as well as plenty of other sailors hoping to get the 3 W's while in Charlestown. The 3 W's being women, wine, and whittles. Whittles being food. In time, a 3rd floor would be added to the Pink House, and the upper floor would be held exclusively for sexual encounters, which would lead the Pink House to becoming a brothel more than anything, which is cool. So now, 1697. This brings us to Anne Cormack, or Anne McCormack, However, the Mick is disputed. Some say that perhaps her and her father dropped the Mick from their last name on the way over to America. But either way, Anne Cormack and her father arrive in Charlestown and settle down. Anne's father, a lawyer, has an office up in Boston, and he spends most of his time up there while Anne is cared for by the maid. So we still have the unresolved threads right now of who is Stede Bonnet, why is he important to Charleston, and also what's with this Anne chick? You probably know, but we'll get to that in part 2. Thanks everyone for taking your time to listen to a topic so interesting to me, and hopefully it was of some interest to you. Go ahead, click the like button, subscribe, etc, etc. You know, all the typical shit that everyone says at the end of every video. Feel free to hit me up on Facebook. I have a page there, as well as I also admin a group, Hoist the Colors, if you're into stuff such as memes, a place to post links, etc. Anything pirate. And if you're mostly just into the aesthetics of everything, I also run a Tumblr page under the name of Caribbean Piracy. Now, I'm going to see you next time, and remember, keep the black flag flying.